Micro-Frontends promised that teams could really run fast once you adopt it. Instead, in some cases, they got slower and coordination became chaotic. Today, I am speaking with Luca Mezzalira, who wrote the book on micro-frontends published on O'Reilly. He speaks about how to build one, how to use it effectively, and how to walk back if you don't like it. I'm Suresh Matthew. This is One Idea. Welcome, Luca, to the show.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me.
You have helped hundreds of teams to build micro-frontends. And for context, micro-frontends are similar to microservices. Now, what are the signs of a successful build and what are the outcomes of a successful build?
So, as any distributed system, I always encourage people thinking about living systems more than I design once and I forget about any design. So, micro-frontends are a distributed system on the UI applied to the front end that can be applied to for several reasons. Sometimes in SaaS products, because there are certain areas that we change more often than others. So why retesting everything every time and shipping a monolith? When you work in large teams, with large teams. So if you have multiple teams working on the same system or product, having a team that are completely independent and ship independently, and how many times they want per day or per week, their piece of software without the risk of compromising the entire stability of a system is another reason why micro-frontends are used. But most in general, every time that you have something that has a high rate of change that is quite common in software for a part of your system, while another part is more stable and doesn't require, let's say, all those changes, that's probably a good place to start with or to migrate an existing software towards.
And with DAZN, you built micro-frontends successfully and it worked, right? What did they have that other teams did not, who failed at it, right?
I think, back in the days, we were talking about 10 years ago, there wasn't even the term micro-frontends. The only thing that I had was this idea of, okay, I know microservices. I want to have their principles and ideas applied to the front end. And I can tell you there was a lot of struggle at the beginning from engineers and also from the management to get the buy-in on something that not many companies have tried back in the days. Again, there wasn't even a name of this architecture. But slowly but steadily, we immediately understood how special was this architecture because we were moving from 50 people in the company to 3,500, and that was the growth in more or less 18 months. 20 months. And the tech department was composed by over 500 techies spread across multiple time zones in Europe. The idea was, how can I empower these teams in a way that they can ship faster and they avoid to break things like it was happening on the back end with microservices. And the idea of micro-frontends came slowly but steadily. Took like more or less 6-8 months for landing properly inside the trenches. Mm-hmm. But one of the main driver was also because our audience in the zone was mainly consuming live sport on living room devices, where there was a high fragmentation of these devices because our low-end devices, very often we have, let's say, devices that were 3-4 years older than the time that we were developing, therefore not very powerful even. But more importantly, the distribution was quite broken because there were some devices that has a marketplace, others that you need to flash inside the firmware, the new version of your application. Therefore, what I thought is, what if we can decouple the domain logic from what I call an application shell that was just the holder and the loader of this domain logic. And we ship that to those devices, but we can constantly change and update, like for web, all my domain logic using this approach of distributed system for front-end. That's basically why I gravitated towards this idea that worked extremely well. And it started with DAZN. And the reality, one I realized that was working pretty well was basically when I went to a conference in 2017, 2018 in Ireland. And there, basically, I explained the logic and what we have done.
Okay.
And I spent like 30 minutes doing the talk and 6 hours answering questions from everywhere in the room. And there was a large conference, like more or less 800, 900 people from
This
different.
is in DAZN, right?
Yes, from different companies and different industries, and everyone was interested in this idea to empower teams, because the whole focus wasn't on the technical side, was on striking a balance between how teams could reach the fast flow that we know was, let's say, the final goal, like the book Accelerate tell us, and how we can create excellence in what we are doing without compromising the stability of a platform. That was the dream that basically came true for many product people.
Got it. And how long did this, at least one set of transitions, take?
So the first micro-frontends took from the ideation, and again, bear in mind, there wasn't any documentation or anything that we can rely on. We built that over time. It took more or less from the ideation. The first trial was towards November, December 2015. And the first micro-frontends that was released for web was around October of the following year. So more or less 10, 11 months of work from the ideation and everything. From that point on, it was rolling out on a monthly basis. We reached the point when we flesh out properly the CI/CD and creating the safe net for developers with canary releases, that we have teams that were deploying 25 times per day their micro-frontends, checking in production how everything was working, and having a canary release mechanism that avoided basically that any company or any user would fail miserably because of a bug or whatever, because we could say 5% of the traffic only on Chrome, only in Switzerland, would see the new version of the micro-frontend. And that was in 2017, 2018, something that was groundbreaking. And in fact, I was also explaining the whole mechanism during reInvent when I was AWS customer in 2019 in Vegas, in the main conference, where I explained basically the whole logic on how we were creating on the edge these very nice entry point for our micro-frontends and de-risking the deployment, creating, let's say, a strong safe net for developers.
Got it. And generally with a group of developers, I'm thinking there could be a few things that they are resisting from a change standpoint. And what are the few that you've seen that people are like scared of or not like that much when it comes to this?
Majority of the time is complexity. It's the reality is in any distributed system, we are shifting the complexity from, now I need to implement this complex piece of logic that, again, it will remain there, but now in a narrow space, because my ownership is just like a chunk of the system, not the entire system, to how can I communicate with other micro-frontends? Or if there is an update of a dependency, how I can do that across multiple micro-frontends? And over time, these, let's say, complexity fade away when you have, let's say, a bit of governance and someone that start to think about, architecturally speaking, all the socio-technical aspects that a system is composed to, because it's not just a technical issue. We have seen that in microservices. We have applied now on the front end, and after 10 years, I can tell you that the largest companies in the world currently are using micro-frontends in different shape or form for different projects, B2B or B2C, because they have seen that specific approach enables teams to, let's say, reach faster production and test more product ideas in production. That is a brilliant approach, in my opinion. The main resistance is always around that, because on the governance side and the architecture, because if you think about that, so far in the last, I would say, 15, 20 years, front-end was basically defined by a bunch of frameworks. So there was React, and then came out Flux, and then came out Redux, and someone else took the difficult decisions. The only thing that front-end developers were doing is choosing the technology stack. Correct. It was React Redux, React MoveX, Angular, AngularJS, or whatever it is. Absolutely. Now we are going back to what it was in my time when I was a front-end developer, the decision-making of how to design a system. And that is difficult. It's not an easy walk in the park, especially if you are not, let's say, 3-4 developers. If you are, let's say, 3-4 teams or even more, there is an inherent complexity that move away from just the technical decisions. It's not anymore, let's choose between monorepo to polyrepo. It's, okay, so how this team will communicate with another? How granular is a micro-frontend? There are a bunch of questions that very often are not arise inside the team because people are not used to thinking like that. But now with micro-frontends, or in general with distributed system, we have a level of thought that I think is helped a lot the practitioner that embrace this distributed system approach nowadays with AI. Because now we are delegating the generation of code, and we need to go back into the thinker seat. And that's the part that many people struggle with because they weren't used to do that.
Got it. Now let's assume a project is done, and at the end of it, they were still not able to move independently, right? They were still deploying together. So eventually, what did they gain out of this?
So first of all, it's an iterative approach. Therefore, the moment that you find two teams that are struggle with, it's very likely that they screwed up the boundaries of micro-frontends. That's quite common. Or they went too granular. And that's another very common approach, because the first time, if you tend to think about components and not micro-frontends, but micro-frontends are not components. Components is basically optimizing everything for reusability. And micro-frontends is optimizing everything for reducing external dependencies, and therefore encapsulation is the main principles. But my encapsulation is based with two things, with let's say the data part and the methods. If those two are decoupled, then it's not encapsulated, the specific chunk of system. Therefore, what we are aiming for with micro-frontends is to stay more granular, so coarse grain, and let's say the micro-frontends know better how they should behave in a specific context. That will make them independently deployable and therefore reduce the external dependency between teams. But majority of the time, we still reasoning like we were doing in the past with shared libraries, with, let's say, fine granularity on the system because we want to reuse more. But that's not the goal of a distributed system. Distributed system is designed for a socio-technical system, therefore for enabling the teams to be independent. And even if there is at the beginning a bit of duplication, no one should scream because that can be optimized later on.
Is there a case where you would say, you know what, stay on a monolith and do not even try to move, right? Is there such a case?
Yeah, absolutely. Micro-frontends as a monolith is just an architecture. An architecture is enabling certain behaviors and certain characteristics. So I'm not here to say micro-frontends are a silver bullet. They are not. They are complex and they should be treated in specific use cases. However, there are certain things that monolith are doing fantastically. So if you think nowadays about the main frameworks that you can find out there, like Vercel as Next.js, that is one of the most popular, Astro.js, or Cloudflare recently announced vNext, and so on. So there are a lot of frameworks that are Butler included. They provide a lot of thoughts around it that works extremely well in a monolith fashion, and sometimes it could be a solution, sometimes it might not, because the context should let's say push towards one direction or another one. It's like more or less on the back end. You don't choose microservices every time blindly. It's not that because they are better or they're worse. You choose because you have a specific reason inside your context to enable multiple teams, maybe are spread across multiple time zones, and you want to work by contracts more than working in a unique code base that becomes very cumbersome to maintain when you have 1 million lines of code.
Got it. From a testing standpoint, from a QA, I'm sure there are automated testing, but let's assume an orthodox team that's really like manual testers out there.
Yeah.
From a QA standpoint, do you recommend having multiple QA teams or having one QA team manage the whole component?
I've seen, let's say, that part implemented in different ways in different companies. Bit plays the maturity of the company, sometimes also the location of the company. So majority of the time, what I've seen is that having QAs inside the teams in a cross-functional fashion is quite common. But we also, yes,
even with Mac, okay,
yeah. So the other approach that I've seen is a mix where you have a few people inside, a few QAs inside the teams, and QAs that are instead in UAT where they are testing overall the critical path or specific path that we decide to have.
Yep.
Those can mix and match with manual testing and automation testing with Playwright or similar frameworks. But I think the beauty overall is the fact that the testing doesn't change drastically for those people. They will do exactly the same thing. The cool thing that although that you can have with micro-frontends, that it might be also a curse, is that you can also cherry pick version to play with others. So for instance, one suggestion that I usually provide to everyone is that unit and integration test will remain exactly the same. It's just a smaller surface for your test, but nothing more. But on end-to-end testing, there is a nice catch where I believe that if every team or the UAT start to test the endpoint between micro-frontends. If I know that the catalog at some point can go into, the my account page, then I will test that part. So if everything will do that, there will be some duplication, but you will be 100% sure that the endover will work extremely well. Similarly, UAT should test mainly the critical path, because if the team do the whole endover between micro-frontends and they cover the critical path, then you will have a rock-solid implementation without any problem. And plus, you can also decide to test when you are inside the team, your micro-frontend that maybe is in development with more stable version that are living in staging or pre-prod, as you want to call it. And because are lazy loaded at runtime, basically, you can decide which version you want to load. And there are some tools that nowadays enables you to decide which version of a micro-frontend more stable or more experimental or in development or in pre-prod can be loaded on a specific environment, usually ephemeral environment, in order to test your part with a more stable part. This is, let's say, an approach I've seen taken with some companies like Zephyr Cloud is doing a great job over there, Vercel as well, and there are plenty others that have started to figure out either with internal tools or with third-party products like Zephyr Cloud to use these tools in order to, mix and match different versions of micro-frontends for creating ephemeral environments faster. The deployment is a critical aspect on distributed system. If you nail it once and for all, then that will work with you in order to enable the modernization and the, fast feedback loop that you are looking for in a distributed system.
Yeah. Once it's nailed, Luca, I agree 100% with you that it's going to be exciting, right?
Yeah.
Now, could there be a bug or a defect that could span across multiple of these components?
Potentially. It depends from how granular are the micro-frontends. But majority of the time, what I recommend is dividing what I called in my book vertical split. So starting with vertical split is basically having one page or multiple pages associated to a single artifact that will be lazy loaded at runtime. Think about, for instance, the catalog. Okay, that could be a micro-frontend because it's a part of a system, is a very narrow scope, and has, let's say, the people working on the catalog will have the domain logic and they will become domain expert inside that specific area. It's not too complex to be associated majority of the time to a team, unless you're called Amazon, that there are, let's say, multiple teams, even for just the catalog. But the reality is 99% of the companies will work pretty well, just slicing on a group of pages, logical group of pages. Usually in domain-driven design helps you here to identify the different boundaries. But the idea is, if I'm going that direction, then the bug will likely live inside a specific domain. So it will be easy to assign to a team more than having them spread across multiple teams. That's why I was stressing before the granularity part. How granular should be a micro-frontend? It should be defined case by case. There are certain situations where you can have a single micro-frontend that represents my account, and you do a backend for frontend for aggregating the data that despite are coming from different domains. Or otherwise, you could have another approach where in a homepage of an e-commerce, you have, I don't know, 3 subdomains that could be, one is a product, one is marketing, and one is, customer support. And these 3 can live together inside the same shell or container for micro-frontends, and the coordination will be minimal between teams. So yes, bugs could happen, but majority of the time, the design of micro-frontends will prevent that will spread across multiple teams.
I see. It makes sense. So basically, ideally, you should not have that scenario in most cases, and if you have it, then you have this option. Well, okay, got it.
Correct.
Yeah, and Luca, right now AI is everywhere. So and it makes it super cheaper to build anything. In fact, you can go all out with microservices. So is there a level of fragmentation that you warn against, saying, you know what, do not do this, even if it's easy?
Yeah, so the challenge AI has is that it relies on data that are trained from public data, right? So, and you can find everything and the opposite of everything without any problem. Nowadays, we are all looking into skills markdown and agents markdown in order to provide context and heuristics in order to create proper systems. I recently created a skill markdown a few months ago that basically helps to shape the boundary of a micro-frontend, because it's an heuristic. It's very difficult to say unless you have the skill, okay, this is too granular or is not. And therefore, what I try to map these 10 years of experience inside these skills, because I think that a system like a probabilistic system like AI can serve very well for these kind of things that are not either a binary answer. It's more, let's say, shades of gray that you need to understand if it's light gray or dark gray, what you need to do. So I created these skills markdown that help the teams to avoid the common mistakes of being, let's say, injecting too much context into micro-frontends, or not looking from looking from a components perspective and not a domain perspective. And these kind of things I tried in several companies, large organization, small organization. I have seen great result with that. I think AI without skills, I've also wrote an article recently about that. If you ask to build micro-frontends, you will find some horror stories very quickly, because the boundaries are not enforced unless you do that by your own. Therefore, having a harness that basically enables you to feed forward the code assistant with the right heuristics and behaviors through markdown files like skills markdown, agents markdown, etc. And then you have on the other side another tool for testing your architecture. There are libraries like TS-Arc that is porting from Arc unit in Java that enables you to test that the micro-frontend doesn't import anything more than the shared folder. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have recursive, let's say, libraries or imports between micro-frontends and stuff like that. You start to, let's say, avoid the common mistakes, and you can create a governance that is fully automated, and there is a higher effort at the beginning, but the maintenance becomes bread and butter later on. So I think AI can even help in this case to create a stronger governance if you know how to do that, leveraging harness and in the future loop engineering.
Got it. So what is the most expensive mistake that you have seen microservice teams, micro-frontend team make?
The most expensive one is decoupling the, let's say, the context of the data from the behavior. There is still this idea of using, let's say, the data that are completely decoupled from the UI, so I can reuse the UI and I can share the data through a state management, shared state management. But the problem is, if you share state management, we are breaking the encapsulation rule. And that's the main problem, because it means if I change a number to a string, mm-hmm. then every single micro-frontend that relies on that specific property needs to change, and has to change simultaneously. So you are breaking the idea of reducing external dependencies. So simple things like I collocate data and I share across multiple micro-frontends has a cascade effect on all the other aspects of a socio-technical system, creating friction where it shouldn't be there. While if you encapsulate the state management inside a micro-frontend and you communicate through events, like you would do in microservices with the event-driven architecture, you will be more decoupled by nature. So you have a contract that if it changes, someone else, we can create an anti-corruption layer when receive that event and say, okay, this is changed from number to string, but I need a number for now because I don't have time to tackle that. So let me create, let's say, the anti-corruption layer for handling that situation. And plus, there won't be any JavaScript error that impair the capability of the system to run during a specific error that is happening. So we are shifting the way how we are designing things a bit in order to leverage the characteristics that we want to have. And therefore, in this case, majority of the time, the error is, let's create a global state manager. That's not the thing that we should do. We should aim to have a very lightweight, let's say, state manager or more generic bunch of properties that you want to share globally, like the locale chosen by the user, or I don't know, the currency, the country, stuff like that, and then let the micro-frontends, therefore the teams, handling their information, configuration, whatever, through either APIs or inferring from common things like query strings. I want to pass the ID of a product. I can fetch from the query string. Or I want to retrieve if the user is authenticated or no. I have the cookie that is available because in JavaScript is let's say, available globally. I don't have to, let's say, to rely on the DOM structure or whatever. So there are a lot of techniques that you can use for avoiding to have this massive share object that is a pain in the back in the long run, and it will create more harm than benefits.
Got it. And I'm going to take an example here. Let's say there's a 10-member UX front-end team, and they have an uber large UX component, and they want to split it for obvious reasons.
Of course.
Do you recommend keeping the same team structure with multiple micro-frontends, or do you recommend splitting the teams also so they can move faster? So essentially, they can go in multiple rhythms. That would probably help the company. So what is your general suggestion there?
The latter, if possible. So having the team that are cross-functional more than component-focused. Because when you have, let's say, only front-end developers, it might be complex. But even there, I had to work in that way, for instance, because we had to support in DAZN 40 different devices between mobile, living room devices that are super fragmented in the web. And therefore, we had to handle like 5 or 6 different programming languages to support all these devices. And therefore, we couldn't afford to have like one Android developer working with Kotlin, one with Swift, one with BrightScript, one with JavaScript, and so on, plus the backend, because the team otherwise was too big. So we divided by domain. So we have a front-end team dedicated to the catalog web, another for catalog TV, only for a portion of TVs, another one dedicated for my account, another dedicated for the landing page. And this approach helped us to maintain the domain expertise inside these teams, focus on a subset of the devices, and the team were able to move fast anyway, and they were well segregated because the boundaries were well designed. I can give you this data point that I will remember forever in my career. After 8 years that we released this software, I was already moved to AWS since then, and I met in a conference my ex-principal engineer when I was working in DAZN, that he told me, in 8 years we never changed the boundaries of our architecture. We never changed the architecture because it never went through, it never impeded us to reach specific goals. And for me, 8 years in architecture nowadays is a huge amount of time. Think about what happened in 8 years, everything. The fact that you are capable, if you do that properly, adjusting when needed, obviously, because you cannot get it right the first time. An architecture for front-end for 8 years that enables you to evolve a system in 40 different devices, it's absolutely crazy. because it's not an easy task, but most importantly, it is very complicated because this UI is working in over 200 countries with different locales, with different languages, with different currency, with different behaviors, features, etc. So having that testimony that if you spend the right, not spend, but invest the right amount of time in designing your system properly, and you are capable to thrive into that, yes, you will find some roadblocks over the first year and a half, but then the path is smooth. It doesn't go on your way. And even if it does, you have, let's say, you just need to change a tiny portion of the system without impacting all the others. For me, it's like the testimony that an architecture well-designed, front-end or back-end as it is, can really help a company to become successful.
Absolutely. In fact, I was thinking about this, right? Having an architecture or a framework survive, maybe a couple of years itself is hard, especially for a company like DAZN. If that survived 8 years, that's magical. That is something that you should probably talk about, preach, and establish in the industry for sure. And generally, when it comes to UI and UX components, I have a huge respect for that community because I generally do not get anything like done in the first pass when it comes to UI and UX. So I have a huge respect. Now, one area where I felt it is still hard to do is to test without a lot of manual intervention. Yes, there are tools out there, but can it really do the job reasonably well is still a question.
I think it depends the depth that you want to reach. I can tell you nowadays I've seen developers that are doing an outstanding job on, let's say, using Playwright and AI in order to generate the test. That's a technique I started to use as well. It's like if I want to do a refactor, maybe moving from one version of React to another version, I usually, let's say, add additional tests. And I let my code assistant to get access to the browser, so you can create a nice feedback loop that is testing things first in the old version. You agree that was working, and then you move into the new world after the refactor and retest everything to make sure that it works. If you are capable to be very atomic, so the context window is not diluted, then you are capable to have a very interesting, let's say, approach that enables you to refactor chunk by chunk your system with the minimum effort on your side, because you know that if the test was passing before and you made a refactor and they're still passing, you are in a good shape. Obviously, there are some intervention points that you need to make, like making sure that the tests are real tests or the one that you care about. But apart from that, then it becomes a pattern that you can reuse in order to port the entire potential application towards this new world that I found very interesting. There is another approach that is using code mode, where you basically instruct the code mode to change to the entire application towards a new version. The cool thing I believe that this approach has for the UI specifically is that you can have like a fast feedback. Because if you're running your Playwright test into the browser and the AI can do that and find the result, then it becomes very interesting.
Got it. And I do understand that there is no bearing on the technology or the language here, but is there some framework, language, technology that's like a lot more friendly to this kind of modernization, or is there something that would probably resist or make it harder?
I don't think the programming language per se or the framework per se will be a barrier nowadays with AI. Obviously, if you find some esoteric frameworks that no one is using, then don't complain if the AI is screwing up a bit, because obviously it's based on probabilistic systems. So and the context window is limited. So at some point you will find a limit or diluting the context window. But in general, I didn't see I think the main problem is understanding your intentions. That's the part that I've seen developers struggling the most. It's developers, QA, product, everyone. Because it seems so, as you said, very cheap now generating stuff. But the reality is the stuff that you have in your mind. And did you clarify in your head what you were expecting, or just the wow effect of the dopamine that you created something in 2 minutes? Because that is a completely different ballpark. For me, I'm extremely indexing extremely around collaborative methods nowadays for helping teams to invest the right amount of time in the design part, more than either synchronously or asynchronously, but more than having the wow effect because, oh, now we have someone that is generating the code that we usually made in a week, probably in less than an hour, and probably even better than what we could do. But the reality is the code is not the problem. It's what the code express the real problem. It was never the problem writing code. It was maintaining software, the problem. That was the main issue. And secondly, are we shipping what we thought we should ship, or it's, let's say, what we understood? That is a completely different ballpark there. So I think the first part cannot be fixed with AI. The collaborative part, I think, has to be there. While the other part can be fixed with AI, or better, we can enhance with AI, but still at the moment, I think we need to retain a certain level of understanding, because at 2 a.m. in the morning, AI might fix something and break something else. While if you don't understand what's going on, then the company is pretty much screwed. And we have seen catastrophic failure in the last, I would say, 24 months that are affecting even large organizations. And therefore, the testing part, the investment on understanding what we need to express, retaining knowledge, for me, currently are 3 pillars that I'm, let's say, fostering every time, but then in the company that I'm consulting with.
Got it. And finally, if a team has already built microservices and they regret it, right? How do they walk it back without a full rewrite?
So if you start with the approach I was saying, where you have a vertical split, then the rewrite is, let's say, trivial, because you have probably 4, 5, 6 micro-frontends, 7 micro-frontends in total, okay? The moment that it's starting to become non-trivial is when you have, let's say, multiple micro-frontends in the same page. And that's not an easy part. Now, again, I've seen, let's say, companies using these iterative approach created by micro-frontends, even for migrating from monolith to monolith with intermediate states. So I've been moving from, I don't know, Angular 2 to Angular 21 in one go. But instead of doing everything in one go and being stealth mode for a year and a half, 2 years, they started with one page, then they did 2 pages, then the entire system, and slowly but steadily they migrated everything. From that point, they were creating another monolith, but iteratively through micro-frontends. That helped a lot to speed up the thing. So now, similar thing you can do from micro-frontends to monolith. So you can say, okay, so now we have a micro-frontends. Let's start to migrate these 2 micro-frontends together, and we put together and create a monolith. Now, I would argue that if you stay enough coarse grain, you won't find that specific point where you say, no, this is rubbish, let's move back to a monolith. When I saw this happening is mainly because no one designed boundaries, or no one thought about micro-frontends with encapsulation in mind and the heuristic that I explain in the book, while they are thinking about components. And they are just runtime components that at some point they will start to leak domains, and then we'll have a cascade effect on the throughput, complexity, governance, etc.
Awesome. Luca, thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you so much for going into the details with micro-frontends. And for any of you who's trying to really build a service or migrate a service, Luca does consulting as well, so you can connect with him. And generally, for a team that's trying to build a microservice or is using a microservice today, micro-frontend probably is the right step for them. And take a look at that and let us know if you run into any problems. This is Suresh Matthew, and this is One Idea. If you like the show, if you get value out of this, please subscribe. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.